The taste of something more expansive than ourself. It's good, no? I've been listening to your silence with so much delight, to our silence, our going deep. And how somehow we've managed to, as a group, co-regulate so well that people get a little bit restless 30 seconds before it's time to finish the session. That's really good fun. So I'm like, oh, it must be time I look at the clock. Somebody getting restless there. And the rest of the time it's just been like, ooh, that taste of something more than, something wider, larger than ourselves. I love this quote by James Baldwin. He was a queer black writer in the 70s, very activist, very, very wise actually. His writings and his quotes are a little bit, I feel they're like the Buddha's teachings. They're intemporal. They're as relevant nowadays as they were in the 70s. This is from a book, The Price of a Ticket. Identity would seem to be the garment with which one covers the nakedness of the self. In which case it is best that the garment be loose, a little like the robes of the desert, through which one's nakedness can always be felt and sometimes discerned. This trust in one's nakedness is all that gives one the power to change one's robes. Identity would seem to be the garment, the clothing, with which one covers the nakedness of the self, in which case it is best that the garment be loose, a little like the robes of the desert, through which one's nakedness can always be felt and sometimes discerned. This trust in one's nakedness is all that gives one the power to change one's robes. My discovery in meditating for some years, I don't know how it's put in the Buddhist teaching, but in my experience, is that the taste of the wider expansiveness is a huge, huge part of the journey, and recognizing the conditions is another huge part. I think in this quote, conditions could almost be the robes we're wearing, you know? The conditions, as I was speaking of yesterday. You know, we're born into maybe a westernized culture or a certain social economic background, type of education. You get my drift, yeah? Those are our conditions. And then there's feeling the skin underneath, feeling what's underneath, what's not just the robes that we were given. So that we can change them. We can change our conditioning. We can recognize our conditioning, our programming, our constructions that we didn't necessarily choose, that are coming through, all of that, our education, parents, As someone was speaking today of, if I may share this, of, some parents from very young age speaking of the ills of the world, the hard parts, and integrating that. And then what? It comes out as some anger. Not necessarily ours, not necessarily us. But the two are so important in this metaphor, to feel the desert, to feel what's not our clothing. What clothing is old and smelly, that is worth throwing away. What part of the clothing is helpful and that we can use with wisdom. We can even be grateful to our ancestors for giving us maybe some stubborn qualities sometimes, that help us to see through, that help us to find strength. But recognizing this comes from my conditioning. So I take stubbornness as an example because I can be quite stubborn. And I recognize that, and I've worked with this quite a bit, like that my family comes from colonialism, and one could carry a lot of shame in that. But with awareness, I can go, well, that wasn't me. But those people were pretty crazy people. Some of them went into the bush with just a few oxens and cut away at the forest and somehow survived and made farms. So in spite of all of my possible shame around that, I do recognize that there was a certain stubbornness there to survive in difficult conditions. And sometimes this comes out in me. And I'm going, oh, that's that crazy stuff going on, that crazy survival, no matter what, I'll stick it out. Is it helpful? Can I use it, or can I just let it go? In this context, can I let it go? Also, someone mentioned in jest this morning reincarnation. And the sense I have also is we don't really know yet, because we're not dead yet. And we'll find out about that. And hopefully, I'll send you a text if I get there first and get the final word on that. But my sense is more that the Buddhist teachings, when they're speaking of rebirth, it's speaking of being born into a sense of solid self that we believe in, an idea of self, a script about self. When we're speaking of dying before you die before you die, it's recognizing that script about self. And I find it a very helpful practice to be awake to that. And when we hear ourselves in our inner mind, writing a script about ourselves, I'm this or I'm that, whether it be something absolutely wonderful, neutral, or putting ourselves down, just script. That's a script. Drop the script. Drop the idea of a fixed self with a fixed identity. As we sometimes, like running a retreat center, like I do in the south of France, people often come and they start to tell me, I'm like this and I'm like this, and you must treat me like this and like this and like this and this. And we all do that. We all do this script writing around our identities. And it can be a really freeing practice to to recognize that, just gently in oneself. Script writing, and drop it. Or, as in some training, I've done some focusing, which is a different, it's a kind of listening technique that I've done a little bit with some people in the one-to-ones. There's also sometimes we need to rewrite our script. And rewriting our script can actually help to change our memory in our cells. So if we have a memory, a real experience that's been like this, we could rewrite our script in the sense, this is how it could have been. This is what would have been more wholesome for me. And rewriting our script can sometimes rewrite in our cells, the memories in our cells of what wasn't okay. It doesn't mean that we're kidding ourselves. It doesn't mean we're pretending that didn't happen. That's just a little parenthesis on script. Do you feel good to listen to Dharma now? Not ready for a big old siesta? Okay. Just want to check, I don't want to push it on you. If you feel more like siesta time or a big old walk or something, cup of tea. So there's some classical Buddhist teachings that are called the three thirsts, aka the three cravings. And the first one is around the senses, the cravings that come to us, the thirsts, the grasping afters, what makes us grasp after and cling around everything to do with the six senses. I only want to hear birdsong and not the farmer on the tractor there or whatever, or the chainsaw. I only want to smell what I like. So all of those thirsts and graspings that happen around the senses. I only want to have nice thoughts. Or I only like my suffering thoughts. That the thinking mind is also the sixth sense, consciousness. So that was the meditation I was guiding last night, around the senses. Do you remember that last night? And there's a constant going out, with the senses, a receiving, a going out, receiving, reaction. And there can be a lot of craving involved in that, in the senses, And then whether we stick to it, there's contact, contact with one of the senses, and we stick and cling to it. Pegamiento, like glue, neoprene, or not, is whether there's suffering. So it's not that the senses are in any way problematic, it's the sticking to. It's the grasping after. If I don't get proper coffee, I'm going to suffer. Do you know what I mean? If I don't have my cigarettes when I want them, things are not okay. There's something wrong with life. Sitting in a meditation retreat and having painful feelings, it's wrong. I'm supposed to be calm and enlightened, etc. So there's this identity creating that's coming from our contact with the senses. We're being born into a script. through the senses. We're creating a substantial sense of self through the contact of the world. And the noticing is the freeing. So we can be constantly being born and constantly letting go. Being born and letting go. And the kind of more we do it, the easier it gets. And then maybe the challenges get bigger too, you know? So that's one of them, is the thirst around the six senses that happen to us. Then there's the thirst of becoming, the wanting to be something in the world. That somebody was wonderfully describing to me in a one-to-one earlier. The suffering that's coming from that chasing after recognition. The need to be something special, to stand out, to be recognized in the world. Knowing that that might come from not having had quite enough love somewhere along the road, hey? So that it's not like, oh, this is some sin. When we're into that, the thirst of becoming, it's just this part of the human process. That we can be curious about it and get to know its roots. The craving, thirst for the perfect relationship, perfect friendship, the perfect job, the perfect status. These are that thirst of becoming. Do you recognize this energy? And it does create a lot of suffering. So just knowing that, oh, I'm in that becoming state of need, thirst. I'm trying to quench that thirst of need for status, recognition. It can drop away, dissolve, or at least loosen its grip on us. The third of the thirsts is unbecoming. The wish to not exist, to disappear, to not turn up for one's life. As I'm sure that we all know this feeling of, oh, I just want to stay in bed today, not exist. And the various forms that might take of, like people have also mentioned to me in the one-to-ones, situations of needing to go and have a conversation with someone. That would be the most wholesome thing and not daring to do it. That we're disappearing ourselves. We're saying, I'm not important enough, I'm worthless. So I'll just disappear out of my life. I'll be invisible. Because I'm not feeling the strength to turn up and step into my location. This is my place in the world. And I have a right. I have a right to be here. But that comes from ourselves rather than a demand on the world. That the world gives us that we can grow that inner trust and strength in ourselves that is, yes, this is me. And there's only one person who can be in this spot. As there's only one person who can be in this spot, and this spot, this spot, this spot. Do you see what I mean? With that name, da-di-da-di-da. We can only occupy our own space. So those are the three cravings. that are often how it comes into being, this sense of self that's deluded. Because as we were speaking yesterday in the questions afterwards and the sharings, we do need a sense of self to exist in this world, to be able to function. Not just function. Function's too much of a kind of factory type of word. I mean, to be, to grow, to be happy in our spot. So it's different from an idea of ourself, an image, a perception of ourself. And in the Buddhist teachings, the Buddha never mentioned what is self. He always spoke about what's not self. Because that he's leaving that, or they left that back to us to find out. For each being to find and discover that. If we're not all our conditioning, if we're not all that programming and our experiences and what we're creating moment by moment through these three cravings, if that's not us, what's left? There's no word for it. There's no concept for it, what's left. But we can still know it. And we can still wear the robes that we need, that we feel good with as well, preferably, no? So, as James Baldwin is saying, it's good if they're kind of loose. Hey, that the robes that are going to help us through life are the ones that fit us, so that we're comfortable. Which is where we can come into that what feels like a paradox of my self-image and perception is a delusion, doesn't exist, and yet I want to change my name. I'm going to tell the world that actually inside me this is my gender, or whatever. We can still inhabit our form in a way that's good for us, that's wholesome for us. And the two aren't exclusive, aren't mutually exclusive. They go together. Like the snowy heron in the field, in the snow, hiding in its own form. And that there is this fluidity of context. We are context, aren't we? And who we are changes through our context, through our environment, through our emotional atmosphere. So, as an example of that, when I was much younger, I lived in Australia, in Sydney, and I went back a few years ago, 2018, and I walked through the same places as when I was an 18-year-old. And so I had body memories of this few years that I spent living in Sydney, and at the same time I was somebody completely different. And it was really fascinating to have such strong body memories, and yet to feel that fluidity, that I wasn't this fixed entity because of context. My context was very different all those years later. But the memories were still valid, but the context is so different. So it was, I'm the same person and yet I'm not. And that is, both of those are true. Because we are context. And it's helpful to spend time in a more expansive discovery of the world, our mind, body, heart, less contracted, to feel into what is our shared mutualities. Hence the meditations on earth element in the body, you know. And as I was saying in the Buddhist text yesterday, the Buddha saying, meditate as if you were earth element. Meditate as if you are water. This helps us to the more expansive taste of not believing in the script, the fixed idea of who we are. It helps to get a body realization of that fluidity. And we can still have a character. We still do have a character anyways. So we're not ditching our character, our personality. We need our personality. Confused? Written too small to be able to see. So on the other hand, if we lose our sense of individual self, then we need too much assistance. We can't get through life without a sense of individualness. So that's where the functioning self comes into it. And we need a healthy sense of individuality. And so we can grow these at the same time. Our healthy ground, our healthy ego, whilst also seeing through a deluded sense, something that's just image, a mirage. And it can be great fun to inquire into. I'm seeing, feeling my conditioning, and what else is there? What else is there? What else is there? I've noticed my script, letting it go. What else is there? What else is there? Oh, there's that becoming energy. Ooh, suffering. There's that unbecoming. There's all that thirst coming from the senses. And part of that needing a wholesome sense of individuality is we need our boundaries. We need to be able to say no. This is me, respect me. And that's a big learning. Learning to express our needs in a way where we're not just using our flamethrower. You know? Where we're speaking from our trauma to defend ourselves. But we're just saying, no, don't come any closer, or no, that's not acceptable. You know, we need to have that strength in us. Okay. So it's a light-hearted weaving. This noticing the scripts, the fixed ideas of self, the believing in a very solid, unmoving self, rather than a fluidness. And a sense of this is me here in my place. Respect that. These are my limits. I lived in a monastery for some years in England in this tradition, the Ajahn Chah tradition. I was the gardener there for some time. And there was a moment, have you been there? There was a moment when I needed to leave. And I decided to get a meeting with the abbot to ask him what felt to me like a burning spiritual question. And I was taking the bus to go back to France, like later in the day. And so I wrote a note saying, can I meet with you? I have this very important question to ask you. And he was like, well, I'm leaving for Thailand later that day. Okay, I'll fit you in. Let's have a tea. So I did as you're supposed to do in these traditions. When you meet one of the elders, a monk or a nun, you bring them a tray of tea, you know. You offer them the tea. You bow down to the teacher. You say something, how are you today? And then we get down to the point. Yeah. And I was like, how do we deal with this this expansive not self and the kind of everyday life, you know? And we're in the big dining hall like this at the tea time. So people normally respect, you know, and they leave you alone to have tea with someone, and someone else over there having tea, and someone there. And somebody comes from the washing room, the laundry room, and says, hey, Noon, come. And I'm like, no, I'm having a meeting. And I'm like, Ajahn, so this important question. And he's like, Noon, come. I'm like, I'm having a meeting. And then I go to the door, and I'm like, he's one of the persons who worked in the gardens with me. And I'm like, I'm having a meeting. I'm having a tea with the abbot. You know, ciao. Close the door. Go back. Sorry, Ajahn. And again, he's there. Noon, can you come here now? And the abbot says, Noon, I think you need to attend to what's going on here. I'll wait for you. Don't worry. We got a bit of time, you know. So I go there, and he's like, you took my washing out of the machine. And I'm like, so what? And I knew he had some issues with, you know, stuff. He always wore gloves, and he didn't want people touching his things. And he was just freaking out that I'd taken his washing out of the machine. I touched it, and he was like, now I have to wash my things again. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Okay. And I go back to the abbot, and I'm like, so this question, and he was like, Well, that's it, isn't it? That is the answer to your question. It's a dance. It's a dance between the form and the formless. This is the spiritual path. We can't skip out of one part, you know? We can't go off into big, wonderful, expansive states of freedom and ignore daily life. And, you know, the need to eat, to poo, to put the fire on, to deal with our interpersonal stuff, to deal with our conditions. But we can't only get stuck in that either and ignore the wider dance. And how we do that dance is unique to each person. How we bring that together. At what degrees, you know? Somebody might go to Nepal and sit in a cave for 5 years and feel a lot of expansiveness and feel really free. And they come back and they get on the tube in London and they just have a breakdown because it's too much. You know? All that rat race and, oh God, I've got to make a living now. I've just been living off expansiveness and love and, whoa. Suddenly, you've got to make a living. Got to deal with people. Parents, children, whatever. Find somewhere to live. So there is an important point still of this script, this image of self. When we see with our inner Buddha, we get a sense of this deludedness. To be kind, to shine a lot of compassion on that, to shine a lot of tenderness for where we're at, for our difficult states, for our difficult birthings. If we just kind of go, I've got to get rid of that, that's all of that script. It's not supposed to be there, it's sin. We're back on a treadmill. And to just recognize that and be kind with it. Be kind with our own process. Be so kind with our process. We can't be like a Roman charioteer, you know, whipping it, going, come on, get enlightened. Come out of this state of deludedness. But we can celebrate, and that's really important. To celebrate our seeings, to celebrate our moments of freedom from contracted mind states, tightnesses, to celebrate our moments of non-suffering, but also to celebrate our seeing of our deludedness. I have a wee text that I find fits well with the kind of meditations we've been doing on sensuousness and elements and finding our saddha, our trust in our own willow here. This is from Audrey Lorde, who is a black writer from the 70s, a lesbian feminist, who is also, I find, just intemporal. And when she mentions living outside ourselves, she's speaking of this when we're coming out of being present in ourselves. When we live outside ourselves, and by that I mean on external directives only, rather than from our internal knowledge and needs, like our boundaries. When we live away from those erotic guides from within ourselves, then our lives are limited by external and alien forms. And we conform to the needs of a structure that is not based on human need, let alone an individual's. But when we begin to live from within outwards, in touch with the power of the erotic within ourselves, and allowing that power to inform and illuminate our actions upon the world around us, then we begin to be responsible to ourselves in the deepest sense. For as we begin to recognize our deepest feelings, we begin to give up, of necessity, being satisfied with suffering and self-negation, and with the numbness which so often seems like their only alternative in our society. Our acts against oppression become integral with self, motivated and empowered from within. In touch with the erotic, I become less willing to accept powerlessness, or those other supplied states of being which are not native to me, such as resignation, despair, self-effacement, depression, self-denial. In touch with the erotic, I become less willing to accept powerlessness. Thank you so much for your wonderful presence and being here with your hearts as part of this talk. You're really inspiring to me, all of you. It's really... I've had so many incredible discussions with people and exchanges, and all of your questions are, for me, like, it's a real opportunity to grow. Thank you.